I feel like I always come to these things and I feel like I'm among the 7,000 who haven't bowed the knee to Baal, so it's rather lovely. I took the liberty of kind of tweaking the topic a little bit because there's a breakout session that is all about dignity therapy. So I don't want to give it to you twice. And also, the other presentation that I have about dignity therapy and dignity conserving care is already in the can for CMDA. So I thought I would do something that would be a little more general. So I'm pretty random, so you have to just kind of hang on. This is our prayer this morning. May these words of my mouth and these meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. And as always, I give my Anne of Green Gables disclaimer. And although I say far too much, yet if you only knew how many things I want to say and don't, you'd give me some credit for it. So one of the things I learned recently is that the word for handiwork in Ephesians 2:8-10 is poema. So we are God's poems, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared in advance for us to do. So some of you may have heard this story. When I was an intern back before the beginning of time, we had a young woman who was 35-year-old. She was a university professor and had a 5-year-old daughter. She had very end-stage breast cancer. She was blind. She was paraplegic. She had Mets in every conceivable place. And I had heard about the idea of using, pardon this, but it was Demerol at the time, a drip to help control the pain. And I broached the subject with her, and she was very interested because she was in a lot of pain. And this was at a time when the big textbook called Cancer, if you looked in the index, there was no entry for pain. Okay, so it was pretty bad. And I ran it by, she said, oh, she would love that. And I ran it by her oncologist, and he said, we can't just give up on her and pull the plug. She's only 35 years old. And so the little intern goes back into this lady's room. She was in the ICU at the time. And she reached around and she found the lapels of my white coat, and she dragged my face down to her face. And she said, with her blind eyes, I don't care what my doctor says, and I don't care what my family says. I just want to be kept comfortable until such time as I am no longer alive. Well, I started the drip. And fortunately, she lived a few days, or I might not be standing here before you as a doctor, but she was comfortable. And that was kind of the spark for me of thinking about palliative care before I even knew there was such a thing. So 10 years later, after finding out about palliative care and training for an entire 4 weeks with Dr. Mount in Montreal, I came home the first weekend and was on call. It was rather interesting. And there were only, when I started doing palliative care in Halifax, when Rob was doing his residency, there were 2 of us that were part-time and Dr. McKinnon full-time, and that was it for the Maritimes. So things have changed. And we had, really, it was very fulfilling educating patients and families and colleagues about what excellent end-of-life care could look like and helping families. But the main things we had to say is we're not Dr. Kevorkian, we're not Dr. Death, which, as we know today. And also just to convince people that they needed us. I once went to change a patient over to oral medications from parenteral medications, did it, and the surgical resident looked at me and said, you get paid to do this? And I said, well, you had to call me, didn't you? So now, really, we're in a season of deep lament. Almost 10% of all deaths in parts of my home province are by lethal injection. And conscience protection, as many of you in this room know, is not just being neglected, it's being actively eliminated. C.S. Lewis wrote this in 1950. 58, and it's in his book, Reflections on the Psalms. And just think about it from today. Christians increasingly live on a spiritual island, new and rival ways of life surrounded in all directions, and their tides come further up the beach every time. None of these new ways is yet so filthy and cruel as some Semitic paganism. I'm not so sure anymore. But many of them ignore all individual rights and are already cruel enough. Some give morality a wholly new meaning, which we cannot accept. Some deny its possibility. Perhaps we shall all learn sharply enough to value the clean air and sweet reasonableness of the Christian ethics, which in a more Christian age we might have taken for granted. I vote for some clean air and sweet reasonableness right now. These are some of the things that patients have said to me when they're telling me that they want to die. There's just no joy anymore. I don't want to be a burden to my family. It's costing too much money to keep me alive. My life with its present limitations is just not worth living. So do we really believe that no shalom, peace with order, everything as it should be, will ever come from doing something that God has forbidden or failing to do what he has commanded? Do we really believe this? Or have we been pickled in the juice and the zeitgeist of our own culture so that convenience and fitting in are more important? We need to think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no nuance in the decision to kill another member of the human family. It's not complicated. It's simply wrong. Now, the nuance comes in how to live faithfully as Christians in a society that accepts killing as a societal good. The killing is not nuanced. How we live, how we present ourselves, that's where the nuance comes in. So John Patrick always does this little thing. What do you have to believe to think that X is a societal good? So I've looked for words to describe what we're actually doing. Assisted suicide, sort of. Euthanasia means good death, and people don't understand what it is. I called it medical termination for a while, but my friends in the U.S. said they don't understand that. So now I'm calling it medical killing. Okay, I'm getting more and more obvious every time. So what do you have to believe to think that this is a societal good? I go to the Christian high school to their Law 12 class, and I make them come up with these things, which they all do. In fact, number 3 is one that they came up with that I didn't have on the list, but I'm not going to make you do it today. So you have to believe these things. First, that it's acceptable in some cases for one member of the human family to take the life of another outside of self-defense, and even that has its limitations. That there's no protective bright line that says we don't kill each other. Remember, to bring in medical killing in Canada, we had to change the criminal code so that it wasn't murder, okay? 2, we have to believe that some lives are not worth living. That there's a double standard for suicide prevention, that if you get to a certain thing, we say, okay, yes, we'll kill you. If the other way, no, we'll prevent your killing. I told my member of parliament when I went to see her that I thought that it was sad that Canada had decided that some lives were not worth killing, and she said, well, I don't believe that, even though she voted for it. And I said, well, you must, because if our government's going to sanction it, pay for it, train people, and regulate it, you do believe it. And the third is that the students came up with is that the benefits outweigh the risks. Can we really say that? And then lastly, at least sometimes, you have to believe that killing is better than caring. So I was lamenting at one point, and my lovely ophthalmologist daughter, who sends you, all of you who know her best wishes, said, Mom, I think you're a bit like King Trinian at the end of the last battle, where there was a false Aslan and everything was falling apart. It wasn't all the fun balls and everything and the hunting parties at Cair Paravel. He was presiding over a disintegrating society, but Aslan found him faithful. Aslan found him faithful. Or maybe we're like Lucy and her colleagues on the Dawn Treader in that very, very dark place, waiting for the albatross to come by in the dark and say to us, whisper to us, "Courage, dear heart." Or maybe we're like Sam and Frodo in the shadow of Mordor with the big spider. Or the men on the road to Emmaus before they met the stranger. We are tired. And it is very tempting to be discouraged, disheartened, and isolated, and then to become almost paralyzed and inactive. So we kind of give up. But as Zechariah prophesied over John, the dawn from on high has broken upon us and shines on those of us who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and he will guide our feet into the way of peace. And as Jeremiah reminded the exiles, what God was telling the exiles, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. My colleague John Scott, who also sends his best wishes, reminds us that we are truly missionaries in a foreign culture. When we step into a hospital or a clinic setting that is a secular setting, it's like we're missionaries. They don't speak our language. They don't hold our values. They don't understand what we do. And can we have that kind of an openness and an understanding that it's a foreign culture as we do that? This world is not our home. And we are going to be hated. Jesus was hated. He was full of grace and truth. And if we think that we can just say it in a nice enough way that we're not going to be hated, find another religion, because really it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But we need to be sure that we're hated for the right reasons. We're not hated because we're harsh. We're not hated because we're rigid. We're not hated because we aren't compassionate. But we have to accept it. It's coming. I've been told so many times that the reason I oppose medical killing is because I enjoy watching people suffer. Okay, you can tell we're big Inklings fans. My car is named Reapy Cheap. Rob's car is named Bilbo the Bolt. And we have Shadowfax, and we have AON, that what friend of ours drives. And we have, what's Myra's car? The one from the Silmarillion. Luthien, yes, we have Luthien too. Okay, so I love this speech by Gandalf. And this is the speech he gave to rally the troops so they could go and attack the front doors of Mordor so Sam and Frodo could get in by the back. And what he said is, other evils there are that may come, for Sauron himself is but a servant or emissary. Yet it is not our part to muster all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule. Pull up the weeds in your own backyard. And let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Brothers and sisters, independence is not a Christian virtue. Interdependence is a Christian virtue. We not only have a duty to care, we have a duty to be cared for when our time comes. And autonomy is an illusion and a lie. And I can go into this for you later if you want, but I think you all know that. Ryan Baumberger, who is one of about 19 adopted kids, has a foundation called the Radiance Foundation, and he says, none of us is better off dead. All of us are better when we're loved. All of us are better when we're loved. This should just be oozing out of us to the world. And the most excellent way is the way of love. It's not the way of rights. Ian Benson once said that rights are an admission that love has failed. If we all took care of each other like we're supposed to from Philippians 2, we wouldn't need rights. But like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. You know, we have to have rights because we don't live like that. But as Christians, I think we need to be careful about celebrating them instead of maybe mourning the fact that we have to have them. And this is, when I say the most excellent way, that's the lead into 1 Corinthians 13. Now I will show you the most excellent way, says Paul, and then he goes into 1 Corinthians 13, which you know. So I spoke at a caregiving conference one time, and their motto was 90% of caring is just showing up. And this is so true. We also had some friends, and the father was, the grandfather was a pastor, and the 5-year-old grandson came to the grandmother and he said, "Nana, I want to invite Jesus into my heart." And she goes, "Oh, we have to go get Papa." And he took her face in his little hands and he says, "Nana, you can do this." So that's what I'm here today to do for you. You can do this. It's not that hard. Remember, it's presence over perfection. Just being there. I asked one of my dear friends whose father died when he was quite young. I said, "What can we do? What can somebody do to help out in a situation like that?" And she said, "Do the dishes." You know, if you've ever been into a home where there's something big like that going on, if you can just go in and do the dishes, run the vacuum, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. In fact, I have a big long list of them. If you want to send me an email, I can send it to you. But just instead of thinking, how can I change the world so we don't have medical killing, do the dishes. So Francis Peabody, in probably the only thing from JAMA in 1927 that is still relevant, said, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." Now, this article we used to give to every medical student at UBC in the communication skills class that I taught, and what they didn't know is that there are 2 biblical references in this article, and they just obviously didn't pick up on that. But think about that. Now, this is, I know you can't see it very well. I tried to get a color where it would show up, but I love my little picture of a fern just unfurling. So this is my magic question. What is the worst part of this for you? And you know, it's so interesting what comes out of it. You'd think it might be pain or the nausea or other things like that, but I've had answers such as, "I'm estranged from my brother in Montreal for the last 5 years. I really want to connect with him before I die." Another woman said, "I gave up a baby for adoption 30 years ago, and I wonder if she's okay." You know, these kinds of things. And we can do something about those. We can make a difference. There can be some healing that happens even if the person dies. Parker Palmer is a Quaker. He's interested mainly in education, but I love this quotation of his. He says, "Violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering." I think that axiom applies on every level of life. When individuals don't know what to do with their suffering, they do violence to themselves or others near them. Doesn't this describe our culture of death? Violence is our response to suffering at both ends of life and everywhere in between with people with disabilities. So your theology of suffering matters a lot. You've got to get this straight. It needs to be very solid and not simplistic. There are mysteries beyond understanding. I really like this book by Timothy Keller, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. It's more like a review article. It's very pastoral, but it has all sorts of how different religions look at suffering and how different Christian groups look at suffering, but he has first-person accounts of people who suffered in many different ways spread throughout the book, and they are just stunning. So I highly recommend this book to you. Errors in the area of theology are really destructive, and silence is better than the wrong words or facile explanations. You know, look at all the people in the New Testament who said, well, it must be your sin, it must be this, it must be that. You know, stay away from that. Presence is what's important, to really be with someone. Peter Kraft is another good resource if you're interested in looking at the theology of suffering. But if you get this, you can really mess somebody up if you get this wrong. So dignity therapy, you're going to hear about this at a breakout session, a workshop. But this is how Dr. Chachanoff, who is my mentor and teacher, who's from here in Winnipeg, must be, I hope he's a celebrity here, because he sure is in the palliative care community. Lovely Jewish gentleman, psychiatrist. Dignity therapy is a psychological intervention designed specifically to address many of the psychological, existential, and spiritual challenges that patients and their families face as they grapple with the reality of life drawing to a close. It's offering a way to preserve meaning and hope for patients approaching death. And his book, Final Words for Final Days, is quite excellent. And these are some of the dignity therapy questions. I can make these PDF of these slides available to you too, so you don't have to madly scribble things down. I'll send it to Stephanie. So these are the things that, some of the questions that are asked in dignity therapy. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What has been your greatest joy or accomplishment? I really like this one. When did you feel most alive? What are the most important roles you've played? Are there things you would want your family to know or remember? And they refuse to pass on anything nasty. You know, if you have another family back in another country, they're not putting it in. Okay. If you want to drop that bomb, that's fine, but they're not going to participate in that kind of destructive things. What are your hopes and dreams for your loved ones? Is there anything you feel you still need to do or say? And in creating this permanent record, are there other things you'd like to be included? So if you want to know more about it, please go to the workshop that's going to be held on this. And it's not just used for end of life anymore. There are people that are using this, getting the dignity therapy done when early Alzheimer's is there. And then the patients can actually read about themselves later on. And it's a really beautiful thing. There was also a young mother who did it early, and when she was getting quite debilitated near the end of her life, her kids would take it out and read it to her. So Dr. Chachanoff and his team have proved that this is a decent question to be asking. They've got publications on it. And the question is, you can use this any place, okay? If you're a family doctor, this is really easy to ask. In fact, we even use it with our medical learners. We say, what do I need to know about you as a learner to help you have the best educational experience possible? Things like that. But this is, what do I need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible? And it was interesting, being here in Manitoba, they asked one lady who was First Nations, and she said, well, it might be important for you to know that I'm a survivor of the residential schools, and I don't really like symbols of authority like white coats, and it really bothers me if somebody comes into my room without knocking. And he says, do you think that changed how we cared for her? Yes, it did. But if we hadn't asked her that question, we wouldn't have known. It takes almost no time. And they do a series of things and put it on the chart if the patient wants it there. Also, there are internal and external aspects about how we experience dignity dependent on both the strength of the self and on the environment. So, care team members, this is really interesting, provide a mirror to our patients. Okay, so this is like seeing things in about 6 mirrors, but the powerful mediator of their dignity is how they perceive that you perceive them. Okay? So if you go into a room with someone who has a nasty wound and you go like that, it's hard for their dignity. If you go up to them and shake their hands, that's good for their dignity, their sense of dignity, not their dignity. Okay. The experience of dignity is like a dance. It's this intimate connection between the care team member's affirmation and the patient's self-perception, and it underscores the basis of dignity-conserving care. So this figuring it out, not just thinking that everybody has to have it the same, but how does this person perceive it? Did that work? Didn't that work? I had 2 old guys in one room that I went to see at the UBC hospital years ago when I was doing rounds. And what the biggest thing they liked was me to bring them a joke every day. So I'd bring them a joke, and they'd laugh at this joke, and I was going out of the room one day, and they said, "Man, it's so nice to have a doctor that makes you laugh." So these gentlemen were both at the end of their life, but that was the most caring thing I could do, was bring them a dad joke every day. So in practicing dignity-conserving care, whose responsibility is it if our patients, family members, or friends are feeling a loss of dignity? So is dignity something that can be lost, or is it inherent? It's inherent. Don't let everybody say, "Oh, I've lost my dignity." If you're not feeling dignified, that's all of our problem. If the patient's not feeling dignified, that's our problem. We need to work on that. It's a community issue. It's not just that, "Oh, well, you can't toilet yourself, so now you're not dignified." Babies can't toilet themselves, and they're fine and dignified. So why is it that when we need help at the other end of life, it's not like that? So practicing dignity-conserving care for our colleagues and our team members and our communities in general, it's hard to give what we don't have. So if our teams and our colleagues and everybody is not feeling like they're being treated with respect, it's really hard to give it. So how do we treat our learners? Do we listen respectfully to all views and opinions? I put these little pictures of things on there. When I taught palliative care at Dalhousie, my mother-in-law and I made the little tablecloths, and when we went in, I brought homemade cookies and put tablecloths on the tables in the clinic rooms, in the little clinic rooms, the breakout rooms, and I said, "We're treating you like human beings because we want you to treat your patients that way." So are we modeling that? Do we honor each other in our language and our attitudes? Do we have opportunities to debrief when things are bad? And how do we give back to our communities, both globally and locally? So, Sharing the Darkness by Dr. Sheila Cassidy, who's a Catholic physician, very interesting story, but when she wrote this book, Sharing the Darkness, she was a palliative care physician in Plymouth, in England, and she had a brief stint at trying to be a nun, and both she and the nuns decided she was better off as a doctor. She was thrown in prison in Chile, I think it was, for treating somebody who was a counter-revolutionary. She has had quite the career, but she has this idea, many beautiful images, but one of them is with the alabaster jar that Mary has, and Martha's sister, and she pours the precious spikenard, her dowry basically, over Jesus' feet. And what Dr. Cassidy says, the most important message is the unspoken one to the world at large, that this dead loss to society, this dying woman or handicapped man, is infinitely precious. If I, as a doctor, spend an hour of my clinic time talking to a woman who has only a few weeks to live, I am making a clear statement of her worth. It is a prophetic statement about the unique value of the human person, irrespective of age, social class, or productivity. It is an affirmation that people matter just because they are people, because God made them in His image and loves them just the way they are, not because they are good or witty or physically beautiful. So this idea that The aroma of that perfume went up and was a witness to everyone around. The extravagant caring that we do for those around us is that same kind of witness to our world. It's an aroma of life that they can't ignore. And it doesn't have to be showy. I love this story of the widow's mite. I actually even have a little necklace with the widow's with the lepta, which was the widow's mite, and I like to think it might have been one that she put in the box. That my dad had a necklace made for me, one of his last gifts to me, with one of those little coins in it. I would have worn it today, but somehow we've locked our safe and can't get it open. So I have my tree of life on instead. So anyway, the thing that really struck me about this story is that nobody but Jesus knew what it cost her. Everybody else, it was just this ordinary little thing, was totally overlooked, but Jesus knew what it cost her. And he's told us about her, and her name is, well, not her name, but who she was is there for the rest of time. And it reminds me of when the Israelites were making bricks without straw, and it says, and God saw, and God knew. So things that are hard for you, that seem ordinary to everybody else, God sees and God knows. Okay, I'm a big fan of Middlemarch and all kinds of poetry and literature. I had an English minor in university, and if this is a spoiler alert, if you haven't yet read Middlemarch and you don't want to know the last paragraph, this is the last paragraph, so close your ears. But there's the main character in it, it starts out talking about St. Teresa and how she did big things, and this character really wants to do big things for God. And her life takes a whole lot of unexpected turns. And Dr. Patrick says everybody should read it because the doctor in the story falls prey to a lot of things that doctors fall prey to, but the lady is not the doctor. And when Cyrus invaded Nineveh, he took the big river and made it into small channels. So that's what this comes from. And that's how they got in under the wall, because the river was spread out. It says, her full nature, like that river of which Cyrus broke the strength, spent itself in channels which had no great name on earth. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Are we willing to live faithfully a hidden life in our own sphere, and maybe not rest in the unvisited tombs, but to live that hidden life and not feel like we're not making a difference if we aren't famous? If we do that, then what we get is gold refined by fire. If we are there with people who are hurting, if we are there in the dark, deep places, nobody outgives God. It's pressed down to us and overflowing. Autonomy and telling people they can have what they want, that's the little gold trinket in the Cracker Jack box. It's plastic and it's fleeting, but gold refined by fire is what we get from being with each other, accompanying each other, caring for each other, and caring even for those who will never be able to thank us. And in order to do this, you have to put on the whole armor of God. You know this. And having done all, stand firm. Now, if you've been faithful readers of Focus, you will have seen my poem that I wrote about, I call it the Emmaus Triptych. There are 3 parts to it. I'm not going to give you the whole thing. There's the nativity part, and there's a part about John the Baptist, and then there's a part on the road to Emmaus. I had to write up this poem for a course I took from Dr. Malcolm Guite, and if you don't know about him, you need to. He's a wonderful Anglican priest and poet in the UK. Just lovely, lovely man. Rob and I had the privilege of going on a literary tour with him and some others with Regent College last summer in Britain. It was a real wonderful thing. And the whole idea of the poem, it was, we had hoped that he was the one. And so the nativity one, goes like, and there's the themes in the poem have a lot of dust and storms and wind and all of these sorts of things that we're already through this, through the other two parts of the poems. But this is the final part about the road to Emmaus. A maelstrom of holy anguish tears through Jerusalem, grinds hosannas to dust, rips open ancient graves, the temple veil. Swept home to Emmaus, our steps and words in mournful cadence, we had hoped, we had hoped, we had hoped. Eyes, throats, hearts, scoured raw with grief. The stranger, joining us, wonders at our sorrow. Are you the only one who does not know? The teacher is dead, who fed, healed, forgave, performed miracles, raised the dead, knew us, was with us, loved us. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Now, bewildering reports, an empty tomb, angels insisting he lives. The stranger smiles. And everlasting, relentless love, the buried seed, the tender blade from Jesse's root, the dry ground defied by life, as it was breathed, as it is written, just as he said. Who is this one who sets our hearts ablaze? The stranger would travel on. Please stay. You are welcome, yea, needed at our table. He blesses and breaks the bread, and we know him. Teacher, we had hoped, expected, might and spectacle, majesty and beauty, power and glory. Instead, his still, small voice, the quiet crack of crust of ordinary daily bread. This bread of presence so robust it may wound our mouths, revives, nourishes, sustains. We are this bread, his broken body, griefs borne, sorrows shared, peace from his punishment, healing from his wounds. Shalom and unfailing love are way bread for the journey. His companions, confronting the age-old dust of the world's deepest pits, nearest his heart in the most broken places. Borne along by the breath, we are more than conquerors, awestruck through our tears and unafraid. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. And my blessing for you as we close. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.